Transmission begins.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
This is the Josh Tolley Show on the GCN Radio Network.
A few years ago, we did a show where we interviewed the producer-director of a movie, What in the World Are They Spraying? Ever since then, we've been getting comments and emails and calls from guests talking about this topic of geoengineering. And it's been a long time since we brought it up. I got to be honest, it's one of those issues that are kind of on the outside of... I guess the topics we cover, but it's still a topic nonetheless, because look up, folks, really just look up. And joining us to talk about this is Dane Wigington. He's the senior researcher at geoengineeringwatch.org. He's got a background in alternative energy. As a matter of fact, his home has been even on the cover of Home Power. Dane, welcome to the show. How are you doing, sir?
Good, Josh. How are you?
I am great. I'm great. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's start at the beginning, because like I said, we haven't talked about this in years. For those new listeners who may have never heard about this, what is geoengineering as a whole?
Geoengineering is the intentional manipulation of Earth's climate systems. We're not talking about just weather modification, which implies a temporary alteration. Geoengineering is being discussed at this point by the entire climate community, governments around the globe. The primary method we're dealing with is stratospheric aerosol geoengineering. It's imperative people understand the climate terms. You might have heard people use the chemtrails term before regarding what's happening in our skies. That's a non-science term, does not lead to credible data. So in this case, we have stratospheric aerosol geoengineering, solar radiation management, and that's a key term because that's a primary objective that appears to be going on, to block the sun. This is the stated goal of the intentionally sprayed particulates in our atmosphere. Again, there's patents to back up what we see in our skies. We have film footage of these tankers spraying up close, nozzles visible, military tankers. So for those who think this is speculation, theory, or something that's not credibly proven, that's not the case. Again, we have up-close film footage of these tankers dispersing this material in our air. We have lab tests to back up this material is falling on us. We have everybody from Obama's science advisor, John Holdren, stating we need to engage in these programs immediately. We have military documents called Owning the Weather. We have governments around the globe stating that this needs to be done. Nobody simply admitting that it's already going on, Josh.
So when we're talking about this issue, you're always going to get the skeptics. And the skeptics, I never really understood, because if you just look up on a sunny day, you see an airplane going across the sky. There's this white path behind the airplane. Why are there skeptics? It's right there. And let me just have you play devil's advocate for a second. What are skeptics saying those white lines are?
We've been fed the immense lie that this is all condensation trails. Now, a couple of points on that. First, when we have film footage of these tankers up close, and we have up-close photographs of the nozzles mounted on the pylons right behind the jet engines, we have these photographs in hand. They're posted on our site. And when we see these trails being turned on and off, you can't turn condensation on and off like it was cut with a knife in the air. It's impossible. It has to be a particulate, a particle in the air. And we know that all commercial aircraft and all military tankers have high bypass turbofan jet engines. It's basically a jet-powered fan. Those engines by design, because 85% of the air that passes through that is non-combusted, they're by design basically incapable of making a condensation trail, except under the most extreme circumstances, which rarely exist in the atmosphere. The higher you go in the atmosphere, the lower the humidity drops. And so when people, again, on a cold day, Josh, if you're walking down the street, if it's a very cold, humid day and your breath condenses, you don't walk a mile down the street, turn around and see a cloud hanging behind you. This notion that condensation can spread out across the sky and cover the entire horizon is absolutely ridiculous. Didn't exist before in any substantial quantity that we've seen historically. And now we have entire horizons covered. Again, that's what got me into this issue. I moved to the Pacific Northwest expecting to find clean air, clean skies, started losing massive amounts of my solar power uptake from whatever these aircraft were leaving behind. I started to research the issue, was astounded at the mountain of data on geoengineering that I had not heard from any mainstream media source, began to test my rain to see if the primary geoengineering elements were coming down in the rainfall, and indeed they were. Aluminum, which is a primary element in geoengineering patents, barium, also a primary element. These were coming down in very significant quantities and increasing rapidly. In over a 5-year period, Josh, my aluminum in my rainfall increased nearly 50,000%. Try to get your arms around that. From 7 parts per billion, which was already high given my location, to nearly 3,450 parts per billion in a 5-year period. It just kept going up. So much so it's changing soil pHs, it's killing aquatic and terrestrial insects. Every human test subject we test is loaded with these elements now. And again, this is the stated purpose of the climate engineering patents, to block some of the sun's incoming thermal energy. But the negative effects from what they're doing is an immense list.
Well, I mean, and there's so much to cover here, and I want to make sure we get to it, but I kind of want to back up a little bit and talk about what's in these chemical makeups here. So how do we know that? I mean, are we sending weather balloons up to the actual trail itself and grabbing it, or are we just guessing based on what's falling to the ground and then noticing a change there? And not that one's better than the other, I'm just saying, what's the process for determining what's in the trail?
If it's coming down in the precipitation, it's in the air column. If it's in the air column, then of course you can only try to identify where this could be coming from. In the case of the western U.S. and Northern California, we have studies from CARB, California Air Resources Board, on the aerosols that are coming from China, because many people want to immediately blame China. Everything's coming from there. But we know these metals, aluminum and barium, are not migrating across the ocean. They can't. They're too heavy. Only mercury, which converts to a gaseous state, can migrate those great distances. So we know it's not coming from China. There's virtually no other plausible source. The materials correlate with the visible spraying we see in the sky. They match the climate engineering patents exactly. It's basically a 2 + 2 = 4 equation. And to give you an idea, with the escalating metals that I mentioned in the last decade, in direct correlation with that, in Shasta, Siskiyou counties in Northern California, we've seen a 90% decline, again, with terrestrial and aquatic insect life in that same 10-year period. 90% decline. We've seen in that same 10-year period soil pH values on our normally acidic soils. We've seen those pH values rise 10 to 12 times toward alkaline, which is what we'd expect with rain that's loaded with aluminum oxide. It raises the soil pH if you have acidic soils. Every single dot connects, every single one. And again, we have film footage of these tankers spraying, turning on and off up close. So there simply is no other plausible source for this metal, and it's the primary metal used in the climate engineering patents and stated on the record by geoengineers.
Connecting these dots, I've been talking a while about how there have been insects just disappearing where I live. I don't even see them anymore, whether it's crickets or grasshoppers. We always see the stories about the bees. And I want to see if that's connected to this when we come back from this commercial break. Folks, don't go anywhere. We'll be back right after this. All right, we're talking to Dane Wigington. He's the lead researcher over at geoengineeringwatch.org, geoengineeringwatch.org. Now, Dane, before the break, I was referencing how all the bugs seem to be going away. I used to be able to walk across my yard, kick up grasshoppers. I would hear crickets at night. Those are gone. We're seeing all the news stories about all the bees just disappearing. Is this in direct correlation with what's being sprayed?
It is. So let's look at the bee colony collapse disorder, Josh. And we have a lot of people in academia focusing on the chemicals being used in certain farms. Certainly those chemicals are bad. They're detrimental to the bees. But if it's just the chemicals, why are the bees just as dead thousands of miles into the wilderness? And they are. Obviously something much, much bigger is going on. Many people think if something of this scale was happening, they certainly would hear about it from mainstream media, but that's a lie. And that's a misconception that people have. So here's a few fun facts that people should, they're terrible facts actually, but people should consider if this is reality. Why haven't they heard about this? In the last 40 years, statistically, the human population has doubled. Global wildlife populations have declined by 2/3. We're in the 6th great mass extinction right now, today. We're losing 200 to 300 species of plant and animal to extinction every single day. Now, if that's a fact, and it is, how come we haven't heard of that? Because the power structure's goal at this point is to simply keep the population in a daze, in a normalcy bias, with a sensory overload, while the house is literally burning to the ground. And that's the situation we're in right now. And climate engineering, of all the environmental assaults we face, and there are countless environmental issues right now, but this is by far mathematically the greatest assault against the natural world ever launched by the human race is climate engineering.
Wow. So why are they doing it? I mean, they have patents on this, so people can't really deny that it is real and it is happening. But they have to have some good reason, right? Because the government is just so benevolent, Dane. They want to protect us.
Yeah, that's quite a misconception that the population is still trying to cling to. First of all, on the Y end, let's trace these programs back to when they were really ramped up, which is the late 40s. And weather, and I encourage your listeners to search that term, owning the weather. They'll find a U.S. military document stating their desire to own the weather. We have documents historically going back to the late 40s and a lot of points in between. We have an 80-page document I found in the NASA archives from 1966. Your listeners can find this by Googling 1966 document geoengineering. And the programs, even as of that date, had budgets in the hundreds of millions of dollars, with 10 major federal agencies involved, 12 universities involved. This has been going on right under our noses for so very long. And in that document, the government states its goal is to decide where it should rain less, where it should rain more, simply to play God with the weather. And why wouldn't we think that governments who exist for their own purposes, their own power, their own control, why in the world would we think that they wouldn't want to control the weather? Of course they do. We know weather modification is going on. Most people have heard of weather modification. It goes on all over the country. Every day there's 150 to 200 publicized programs annually from states and counties, municipalities. But those programs mean nothing compared to the overlying geoengineering programs. And again, there is so much documentation, Josh. We have congressional documents from 2013. We have documents right now about every several days or every week from different parts of the globe, different organizations around the globe. Geoengineering, if your listeners search geoengineering or climate engineering, they'll find a mountain of solid science data. Avoid the chemtrails term. So this is about credibility. And again, media is not covering this issue for obvious reasons. How do you think the population is going to react when they know they've been sprayed like insects for decades?
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because they're spraying for some reason. They're trying to control the weather. That's not necessarily new. I remember back in the late 90s, early 2000s, when I was living in Colorado, ski resorts would do that all the time to get it to snow. But somebody's going to say, well, if they could do that, I mean, come on, Josh, if they could control the weather, why is there such a drought happening in California right now? Is there any validity to that objection?
Now, that's a great question. And we're back to the earlier statement you made about the government being benevolent, which we know is not the case. It's not the case at all. And this is where people in the U.S. need to immediately wake up and face reality that we don't have a country with a government. We have a government with a country. We have basically a criminal cabal that controls this country and many others. So the notion that they're doing these programs for the common good could not be further from the truth. Again, this is about power and control. So in the case of the California drought, I have tried to sound the alarm on that for a number of years. My presentations going back several years stated this will happen. It can't not happen. When we see on satellite imagery them blanket spraying the Eastern Pacific. And we have, again, people can see this at geoengineeringwatch.org, our website. And by the way, we don't sell anything. We're non-political. We simply exist to try to sound the alarm. So when we have satellite imagery of them blanket spraying in the storm track for California, there was no question this drought had to happen. And I've had appointments with many people, including at the Capitol in Sacramento, including the Lieutenant Governor, going back a very long time, stating that, presenting data to them, that this would happen. It's a 2 + 2 = 4 equation. When they're aerosolizing the storm track, and when you put too many particulates in the atmosphere, Josh, of too small a size, and we're talking about nanoparticulates, by the way, that's why they're so harmful to the human respiratory system and to the environment as a whole. But when you saturate the atmosphere with these tiny particulates, you don't augment rain, you diminish it. There's too many condensation nuclei, there's too many particles for the moisture to adhere to, so it just migrates on. It does not, the droplets don't combine and fall as rain. So, and we have lots of science study to back this up. So the California drought had to happen. There's no question it's a direct result of climate engineering. There is absolutely no question about that. And when you have the entire climate science community not speaking about this issue or pretending it's not happening already, they are speaking about it. In fact, the whole climate science community is discussing it, but they're not admitting to it. Why? Because it's an extremely bad career decision to mention this issue. And we know that. And I've spoken to NOAA scientists face-to-face, USDA scientists face-to-face, Forest Service scientists face-to-face, Fish and Game, people who know this is going on. They're afraid to speak out for obvious reasons. They have no First Amendment protection. And I've been told that to my face, that we know about these programs, we're alarmed as hell, we have no First Amendment protection, we don't know what to do.
Wow. So let's talk a little bit about the contents in these trails. I mean, okay, so it's affected the bees. I would naturally assume then as the food chain goes up, it's going to affect everything else up the food chain, all the way up to us. You said aluminum and barium. I mean, these are obviously very dangerous. Study after study shows how dangerous deodorant is that has aluminum in it. This has got to be bad for the human population too, right?
It's extremely detrimental for the human organism. And again, let's be devil's advocate in this issue as well. Many people would like to believe that if all this stuff was floating around in the air column, it would show up with air testing agencies. Not true. Why? Because at best, air quality testing agencies test for PM 2.5, 2.5 microns. Most test for PM 10 microns. We're talking about the particles that are coming down on us being exponentially smaller. Nanoparticulates, you can fit 50,000 of them across the width of a human hair. They're inconceivably small.
Whoa.
Why do they use such small particles? Because you have a greater volumetric forcing for the amount of material used, which means you have more surface area for a given amount of volume.
Well, Dane, hold on one second. We're up against another break. I want to talk about how this affects humanity right on the other side. Don't go anywhere, folks. All right, we're talking to Dane Wigington, lead researcher for geoengineeringwatch.org. And as weird and as odd as this topic might sound to somebody who's never heard of it, it's very real, it's very prevalent. And Dane, somebody's going to say, well, wait a second, you guys just started talking about how it affects humanity, but Josh, think about this. Whatever's in the air is going to fall on the people who are doing it too. So, Dane, what about this conundrum we have where whoever's going to be spraying is going to be hit with the same thing they're spraying?
That's exactly true. And let's look at how many examples we have of them, meaning those in power, doing this to themselves. Let's start with the 2,000 plus nuclear weapons that have been detonated on our planet, which has contaminated all life on Earth. Let's move to now a very obvious example of Fukushima, which may kill us all if it continues. There is no technology to deal with what is happening in Fukushima right now. So we have one facility out of some 400 on the globe that has gone bad, that may end life on Earth, and yet they're building 30 more of these facilities right now. So again, we have many examples of what they do to themselves, the use of depleted uranium ammunition. With our own troops, let's talk about the people at the Pentagon using depleted uranium, radioactive ammunition, that has contaminated our own soldiers, some 200,000 of which had Gulf War syndrome. I know a lot about that issue. we're not dealing with sanity, Josh, not in any way, shape, or form. And if you look at it through the lens of those in power, again, in their quest for power, we're not dealing with rational people at all. In the case of climate engineering, if you look at it through their lens, of course they want to control the weather. And again, we're talking about historical fact. We're not talking about speculation. We have examples like Project Popeye in Vietnam, the U.S. weather modification programs over Vietnam that were so successful that by 1976, the UN banned weather modification in wartime. We have historical facts going back to, again, the late 40s. So this is not speculation. But as you hamper the weather system for so many decades, you do real and irreparable damage. And that has happened now. So now we have a global cataclysm unfolding in the Arctic. We have mass methane release. It's happening now. There's enough methane in the Arctic to turn this planet into Venus, quite literally. That's a mathematical fact if it continues to release. Geoengineering has altered upper-level wind currents. That's altered ocean currents. We have warm water pumping into the Arctic now. That's helping to thaw methane. And I'm not blaming everything on climate engineering. Again, the human race has been horribly destructive to our planet. And there's a lot of causes to factors in regard to the climate that's changing right now. We put 100 million tons of CO2 in the atmosphere a day. We've cut the forest down. We've paved the planet. Those who don't want to believe that has any effect are simply not looking at reality. But mathematically, the single greatest climate disrupting factor of all right now is climate engineering, and it's being ignored by the climate science community because, again, it's a very, very bad career decision to even talk about this issue. So if we look at it, why they would do this to themselves, they're simply not willing to let go of that power, regardless of the consequences. And now that you have opposing countries also using the same techniques, China and Russia, it's just something they won't let. Just like nuclear weapons, why would we have enough nuclear weapons to exterminate life 12,000 times over? Not dealing with sanity.
Yeah, but that's exactly it. We're not dealing with sanity because here's the weird side of this. I mean, they say that saving the earth is so important and the environment, and in some cases we've made some improvements. For every one tree we lose, there are now 2.7 trees. The forests are actually getting bigger. The air in the United States has less carbon dioxide, less carbon monoxide than it did 50 years ago. So you would think, okay, there's progress being made. Why on earth would you be spraying this stuff into the air? Is there even some sort of excuse given that has potential to sound right? Other than, well, we want to be, Dr. Evil and control the weather. Are they saying it's to combat global warming or to reflect the sun's rays or anything?
Yes. Those are, again, the primary stated goals of climate engineering, to slow a runaway global warming event, a runaway greenhouse event, which we are on track with right now. So here's the problem, though. Okay, first, let's go back to the notion that the air is cleaner in the U.S. Absolute lie. You don't have respiratory mortality going off the charts, and it is going off the charts. Every human ailment related to respiratory distress is going absolutely off the scale. So the clean air notion is a total lie. The notion that forests are getting bigger, absolute lie. I live in the middle of a boreal forest that is dying by the day. You can't plant saplings here anymore because they die. Mature trees are dying everywhere. Boreal forests around the globe are dying. Huge mortality. In Alaska, the latest statistics are 30% die-off in the boreal forest there. The actual statistics are greater. So these notions of anything getting better, absolute lie, just like the unemployment rate, Josh, total lie. So the stated purpose, yes, is to slow a runaway greenhouse effect. But we know, although geoengineering can and does create large-scale, temporary, and toxic, by the way, regional cooling, it comes at the cost of a worsened overall warming. Why would we think otherwise? If you put a shield, if you will, in the sky, these toxic particulates that reflect some of the sun's incoming thermal energy, it also traps energy, and it also disrupts the hydrological cycle completely. As I mentioned earlier, the rain cycle is completely disrupted. This is hard science fact, and it shreds the ozone layer. For those that have felt how hot the sun feels on their face if they get a direct shot, it's not your imagination. We are metering UV. And try to imagine this, Josh. How can the power structure hide this? This is an indication of how total their control is over the flow of data and the media that covers it. we're getting UVB readings that are 1,000% higher than we're being told. We're told of the total incoming UV, only 5%, no more than 5% should be UVB. We're getting 60% UVB. We're even getting UVC on the surface, and that's the last band of UV radiation before X-ray. It's burning the bark off of trees. It's causing trees to drop foliage. Anybody who knows anything about trees can see the trees are suffering horrifically. It's killing plankton. Let's talk about that for a moment. UV radiation kills plankton. We have global plankton stocks now down 50 to 60%. No plankton, no life on Earth. No ozone layer, no life on Earth. You'd think we'd hear something about this, wouldn't you? But we haven't, and that's the goal. So they are trying to, this is the vicious cycle of the why again. The pharmaceutical approach to the warming on planet Earth, to put this toxic shade up, which does far more harm than any perceived good, but a lot of people are making a lot of money off it. There's a lot of power that comes from this by being able to control and manipulate the weather. And even back to California and the drought, why would they intentionally cause this? You can look at California as a climate sacrifice zone for them trying to cool the eastern half of the U.S., which they've done quite successfully. Someplace has to fry. You have to block the inflow of warmer air to push it up through Alaska, which is exactly what they've done. So you can look at California as a climate sacrifice zone. And as they've cut the water off, now that's giving them an excuse to start taking water rights from everyone. There's always many angles. There's always many layers to the onion. But these dots do connect, Josh. They do.
So what's the global agenda here? I mean, you said other countries are hopping on board as well, China, so on and so forth. What's the objective? If it's not really to make the planet safer or to help the environment, because obviously they have to know what they're doing. If you and I know it's bad, they have to know it's bad, so that's not it. And it's not to weaponize the weather, because they're not really doing that either, especially if they're spraying it over themselves. What's the point?
Well, again, I would argue that it is to weaponize the weather. That's exactly what they've done. The military has stated that as a specific goal, as I mentioned. And also, any notion that people have that the U.S. government would not do anything to harm U.S. citizens is an absolute delusion. Our own troops, as I mentioned earlier, exposed to depleted uranium, weren't even told. Now they're sick, dead, dying. Let's look at 9/11 and the first responders that were lied to, now dying with cancer. Does anybody care? Nobody even talks about it. Our government doesn't care. Our government doesn't care about our vets. They don't care about us. And again, our government doesn't exist for us. So this is absolutely a weaponization of the weather. And as far as not doing any harm or harming themselves, let's take another example. You remember the chemical Corexit, Josh, that was used in the Gulf of Mexico? Do you remember the name of that chemical? So a lot of people that don't know what that is, and the name certainly is deceiving. It doesn't correct anything. It hides it. And this is an important part of climate engineering. In the Gulf of Mexico, they used a chemical that by the environmental impact report stated made that situation 52 times more toxic, but they used it anyway because it hid the oil. Same thing with climate engineering. They're trying to hide the extent of damage done.
All right, Dane, stay where you're at. We have another break. We'll be back right after this. Don't go anywhere. Second hour, Josh Tully Show, GCN Radio Network. You already know the phone number. You already know the website. You already know to get Evangelpreneur. So let's just get back to it, shall we? We're talking about a fairly controversial issue, and that's this idea of geoengineering. It's something that so many people want to stick their head in the sand and just say, okay, that doesn't exist. It has to be some sort of conspiracy theory. But really, all you have to do is look up. And we're talking about this with Dane Wigington. He's with geoengineeringwatch.org. And Dane, before the break, we were starting to talk about, you know, the causes, the reasons, the who's, all that sort of stuff. I want to keep digging, though, because I want to give people enough information to really have a conversation about this with their friends and family and neighbors, and then lead them to your website. But one of the questions going to come up is, well, what airplanes are actually doing this? Are we talking about United flights? Are we talking about some sort of military aircraft? Why do they do it during the day and in the sunlight? Why don't they just do it on cloudy days or at night so nobody sees them? What about the logistical side of this, Dane?
First of all, yes, we're talking about commercial and military aircraft. In regard to commercial aircraft, and we know this, by the way, because we can track these aircraft from the ground with a flight tracker, and we have film footage of even commercial aircraft shutting on and off with the spray mechanisms. So we have film footage of the crime happening. That's the end of the debate right there. We know this is going on. On the commercial aircraft, we are not implicating commercial pilots, commercial personnel. We have enough data to say that these mechanisms on commercial aircraft are likely centrally controlled, much smaller payloads. And we have letters, for example, from union mechanics that have been fired, reprimanded because they wanted to know why they weren't allowed to work on these systems, these retrofitted systems. And we know the systems are retrofitted after the planes leave manufacture in regard to Airbus and Boeing and some of the other aircraft, because the spray nozzles that we have up-close photographs of mounted on the pylons directly behind the engine exhaust are not there when they leave the factory. So we know this is a retrofit. We know on. We can track them from the ground. In regard to the military tankers, again, we have up-close footage of these aircraft, KC-10s, KC-135, C-17 Globemasters. I challenge your listeners, go look at the film footage. Don't believe me. And you'll believe what you see with your own eyes when you see the kind of footage we have, which could only have been taken from another Air Force aircraft directly behind a military tanker. Certainly no private aircraft would be allowed that close. If I could back up for a second, Josh, again, I wanted to clarify on the human respiratory issue why this is not showing up. Because the particles all air quality tests for are exponentially larger than the particles that are being sprayed. So the smaller particles go completely under the radar. So when they publicize that the air is cleaner, only in regard to these larger particles, not the smaller ones. You can't catch minnows in a tuna net, right? You follow me on that.
Right.
You can't get these smaller particles with the air testing they do. By design, these particles go under the radar. So when we have the respiratory issues have gone from 2005, 8th on the list of mortality in the U.S., to 2010 was 3rd. This should have been headlines everywhere. This is a gargantuan jump in respiratory mortality in the U.S. Let's look at autism, which we directly relate to aluminum and toxic heavy metal exposure from multiple sources. But when you have an increase like what we have a over 10,000% increase in autism since 1975, from 1 in 5,000 to 1 in 47. And Josh, now we have statistics from MIT. Most people know who MIT is. They're telling us now in the current trajectory, within 10 years, 1 out of 2 children will have autism. And we know these metals are in the human organism now, because every human test subject, hair, blood, urine, is absolutely packed with the same heavy metals that we know are associated with climate engineering. So again, the dots from every direction connect on this issue. And we have film footage of everybody from Obama to science groups around the globe, governments around the globe stating we have to geoengineer immediately to slow a runaway greenhouse effect. We know they're not going to ask our permission. We have the top U.S. military brass, and your listeners can look this up. They just search this online. Top U.S. military officials stating climate change is the greatest national security threat of all. Do we really think they're going to ask our permission before they do this?
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the health impact, because you mentioned respiratory issues. I know that has increased. A lot more people with asthma, a lot of kids with asthma, a lot of COPDs, all that sort of stuff, even though smoking has gone down. What other sort of health implications does this have? I mean, I've heard before that aluminum is bad for the brain.
It's extremely detrimental. Now, let's look at this. Every human ailment we know of connected with heavy metals is going exponential. And we know these metals are in the air. We know we're breathing it. We know it's in us. Again, we're not speculating anywhere along this line. So in regard to the brain, 1 in 3 seniors in the continental U.S. right now dies with Alzheimer's and or dementia. Not dies from it, but dies with it. So that type of increase is so incredibly off the charts. What's going on? You think people would ask. So when we have such small particulates, they enter straight through the lung lining, go straight into the bloodstream, and we have internationally recognized scientists confirming this. Dr. Russell Blaylock, internationally award-winning neuroscientist, on the record stating this is happening, referring to this exact issue, climate engineering, and the particles from it. So we have experts that are speaking out about this, but these metals are bioavailable and bioaccumulative. That means they are easily absorbed, impossible to get rid of, next to impossible. They build up in your system and start causing a cascade of damage. We know each of these metals are toxic in and of themselves. Of course, people know aluminum is toxic, but inhaled aluminum is far worse than ingested aluminum. So you start mixing these metals together, Josh, you come up with what's called synergistic toxicity. They are much more toxic when combined. We have peer-reviewed study in the case of aluminum and mercury. We all have mercury in us from multiple sources. Now we all have aluminum in us. There's no question about that. Those two metals, when combined, the toxicity can increase as much as 10,000%. In the case of fluoride, fluoride helps aluminum migrate past the blood-brain barrier, to go to your initial question. So the amount of onslaught to our system from these metals is cataclysmic.
Does this have anything to do with the dropping fertility rates that we're seeing everywhere from India to the U.S. to South America?
Absolutely. And we have, again, we have science study to show exposure to these metals has a huge amount of effect on the human organism. They can be disrupting endocrine disruptors. And we know that to the human gut, we just published some studies on the nanoparticulate effect on the human digestive system, if you will. And from every direction, these particles are infiltrating the entire web of life, including our food supply. We know, again, because they're bioavailable, they're being uptaken into all plant life. And we have Norwegian researchers that are publishing study that shows they're seeing horizontal gene mutation in all plant life. Now, when you have, again, an element that's not natural to nature, and you'll hear some people, Josh, say, well, aluminum's natural, it's 8% of the Earth's crust, and yes, that's true, but aluminum doesn't exist in the environment naturally. Free-form aluminum doesn't exist. It's always bonded to other elements, always. It can't exist in free form unless it's been mined and refined and dispersed, sprayed. So the bottom line is these elements should not be there. They're in everything now. We, in a sense, don't have anything organic anymore, Josh, because we know these materials are being uptaken. We know that. We have the lab study to prove it. So, and we have, by the way, we have disaster capitalists like Monsanto, who is engineering aluminum-resistant seeds. So again, we see the disaster capitalists that always try to profit off whatever cataclysm is being created. But the fact that these programs are going on can't really be disputed.
Well, Dane, when we get back, I want to talk about what do we do about it then? I mean, do we just burn up the planet and start over? And that's, of course, facetious. But, I mean, what do we do if it's in the air? We'll talk about that on the other side. Don't go anywhere, folks. All right, Dane, so basically the world is going to be destroyed. It's going to turn into Venus. We're all going to die. What do we do about it?
Well, look, and if I could back up just here again to reiterate on the why problem, it's a primary aspect of climate engineering at this point is to try to hide the damage done from a population that really doesn't want to know the truth in the first place, to confuse and divide them as long as possible. And we've seen a lot of that, Josh, in the continental U.S. We've seen an anomalously cool eastern U.S. for 2 years now. And I posted a lot of this issue. It is meteorologically unprecedented and impossible to have the scenario we have without engineering. The most anomalously below normal place in the entire world for the last 2 years is the eastern half of the U.S. lower 48. How can that be? It's from climate engineering. There's no question about that. We have the satellite imagery, the data to prove what I'm saying. Why would they do that? Because it confuses and divides the American population. It hides the problem by causing this confusion and division. Why would the media focus only on the snow in Boston over and over and over? They can chemically nucleate snowstorms, by the way, and those who doubt that, please Google Chinese scientists create artificial snowstorms. You'll see the mainstream media covered that until they did $1 billion worth of damage to Beijing. We have the patents for this, patents from NASA. They can chemically nucleate snowstorms. So there's no question that this engineering is going on because we've tested the snow. So why would you engineer cold events in one area? Again, creates a lot of confusion, allows them to create the headlines they want, allows them to make people think that there's some debate about the state of the climate or the global climate, that it's not in meltdown when it is. So it keeps the business as usual paradigm going a bit longer while the power structure is making provisions for total societal collapse. That's part of the climate engineering issue. Again, again, also being used as a weapon around the globe. We see U.S. occupation in countries that have been droughted to their knees. All the Middle Eastern countries, before the governments were toppled, were in record drought. We had leaders of those countries on the floor of the UN stating that their countries are being droughted out by NATO weather modification programs. This is no secret for those who watch international media, but media in our country covers none of this. So back to what do we do? Quite simply, if we don't stop climate engineering, mathematically speaking, and the planet's not allowed to respond to the damage being done to it on its own, we mathematically have no chance for long-term survival. And those who doubt this need to look at the statistics. You can't lose 200 to 300 species a day to extinction for very long. And when we have the kind of statistics we have in regard to Venus syndrome, and that's, as I mentioned earlier, I didn't mention that syndrome, that's not a scientific, or that's not a metaphor, rather, it's a scientific scenario. I encourage people to Google that. If we continue on this track, the planet won't support life for much longer. So what can we do? We must reach critical mass. We must. The system is bought, sold, and paid for. Again, I've been in Lieutenant Governor Newsom's office. I've met with top EPA California officials, California Energy Board, Air Resources Board, Barbara Boxer, you name it. The system's bought, sold, and paid for. Only when the people are standing in the street demanding that this issue be addressed do we have a chance of stopping it. And then our military brothers and sisters, and this is important, who are being told what they're doing is for the common good. And that's what they're being told. I know this. I've spoken to a KC-135 pilot face-to-face. That's what they're being told. We must reach critical mass, Josh, so that our military brothers and sisters understand that what they're doing is harming their own countrymen. Do you think that the people spraying Agent Orange, the pilots in Vietnam, knew they were killing their own comrades on the ground? No. So this is the compartmentalization that we have that allows a few people at the top to do what they're doing to the rest of the populations of the world. And we have to break that paradigm. We have to reach critical mass of awareness.
Are you getting any support from local and state government officials? I mean, the federal government, I've pretty much written them off. They're all on the same payment plan. But local and state government officials, have any of them opened their eyes and said, okay, we want to help?
Unfortunately, you're talking about the same type of people that occupy those posts. Their lack of backbone is truly astounding. And I hope at some point that these officials are held accountable by a population, legally accountable for their part in helping to hide these crimes. So let's look at Shasta County, where we had the largest turnout of citizens in Shasta County in front of the Shasta County Board of Supervisors of any subject in that facility's history, to demand that this issue be addressed, because we know there's a massive heavy metal contamination. There's no question about that. We have 70 lab tests at the state-certified lab to prove that. We know there's a massive UV radiation issue, and still they won't address it. But now it's on the record that they know, going back to 2008. And when lawsuits are filed, and that's coming, those people will be held accountable for not disclosing to the population. We know that they can't stop this. We know that. But they are not disclosing to their citizens a very real and verifiable threat to their health. It makes them liable. So at this point, yes, are their wheels turning to bring this to light legally? Yes. I say that with firsthand knowledge. So we're at a point where we hope to put a break in this dam where it can't be hidden any longer, where the public officials, whose job it is, by the way, to hide this. And I know these people. I know a fish and game biologist, top biologist, 30-year person, just got let go because she keeps trying to address this exact issue and was beaten down every time she did, because it's simply a bad career decision to address this. So no, these local officials, they're the same as the ones up the ladder. The system seems to attract the same kind of people, Josh. So it's up to us to get this out in the open. And one thing I stress to your listeners, if you're trying to share this issue, one, use the science terms, use climate engineering, or use solar radiation management, and pass some credible data on. Don't just point at the sky and start ranting. That doesn't help. That just makes people think you don't know what you're talking about. We have single-page flyers at geoengineeringwatch.org. You can download for free, print them where you're at, have something credible to pass on, and you will gain traction on this issue. And one way or another, this issue is going to come to the light of day, because countries around the globe are talking about this. Governments around the globe, senators in Italy are trying to bring this to light, Malta, Sweden. You can't hide this much longer, Josh. The climate system is disintegrating, and quite simply, the power structure is maneuvering. Thus, we have the military exercises that are coming up. I would argue at the point in time they know they can't hide this, some very big shoes are going to drop. They're putting their chess pieces into place right now, and Jade Helm, the military exercises coming up, is part of that.
So you're thinking Jade Helm is somehow connected to this issue?
I'm saying it's preparation, and this is where I would connect them. We have a global economy that is a total facade. We have an environmental system the biosphere is imploding. Marine ecosystems are imploding. Again, the plankton stocks I mentioned earlier, 50 to 60% decline. We have fisheries shutting down. We have global pelagic fish populations, 95% depleted. How long do you think any of us are going to be eating fish? At the point in time that the powers that be can't hide the gravity of what we are all about to face, at the point in time they can't hide that, and people realize the party is over, the party really is over at that point. And I would argue that at minimum, Jade Helm, the coming military exercises, are preparation for how governments are going to deal with the population that's about to panic when they find out their whole reality is nothing but a lie. Again, anybody who thinks that you can expand perpetually on a finite planet with finite resources is not living in reality.
All right, Dane, hold on one second. We'll be back right after this break. All right, we're talking to Dane Wigington. The website again, geoengineeringwatch.org. And Dane, this is becoming a much larger topic than a lot of people, I think, originally envisioned. They thought, okay, well, maybe they're just spraying something in the sky to protect us from global warming, and they're going to try to cover it up. You know, who knows why? Maybe because they don't want us to know how bad it is or whatever. Now you're saying that this is actually making the problem so much worse that there's going to be societal decay, there's going to be the Venus effect, the world is basically going to destroy itself. How long can they keep this a secret?
I would argue not much longer. Again, the amount of lie we've been fed. And let's drop back to what we were talking about right before the break when I mentioned the total facade of any economic growth at this point. The Baltic Dry Index is the index of all shipping from anyone to anyone over oceans, all dry shipping. It's in the basement. It's crashed, virtually crashed. You can't hide that with fake numbers and printed money very long. We have ecosystems crashing again around the globe. We have the kind of lies, Josh, many people have chosen to believe that there's some great expansion in Arctic sea ice, for example. It's at all-time record lows today. Where's the headline on that? Where's the headline that the Arctic ice, we may be heading for a blue water event in the next year or two, which means no Arctic ice in the summer. Now, what's the implications of that? Again, this plugs right back into geoengineering. The ice reflects incoming thermal energy. It's white. It reflects about 90% of the sun's incoming thermal energy. Once that ice is gone, the ocean absorbs about 90%. More ocean heating, more methane release. Why is methane such a big deal? Because methane is exponentially more potent a greenhouse gas than CO2. Methane is covering the planet right now like a layer of glass. Methane we're told by the scientific community methane is 20 times more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas, but that's over a 100-year time horizon. Over a 10-year time horizon, it's 100 times more potent, literally trapping the heat on planet Earth, and we're seeing the results of this from the ground. I don't go from any particular data source. I look at all sources. We're seeing nighttime low temperatures rise twice as fast as daytime highs. That's exactly what we'd expect with methane release. So again, they're trying to hide the scope of what's unfolding. A lot of sources of damage to the planet, but geoengineering being the pharmaceutical approach to curing an ill or hiding it, just like a pharmaceutical we see on TV. Take this for one ailment, and by the way, here's 50 other things you're going to get with it. It's the same mentality. So we see as everything is trying to be hidden or obscured, the collapsing economy, the collapsing biosphere, as that's hidden from the population to the last possible minute, what's the power structure doing? They're digging in, and they're preparing for collapse. I assure you, if your listeners investigate this, they'll find what I'm saying to have credibility. The Doomsday Seed Vault in the Arctic, has anybody heard of that? It's a massive underground vault, okay? You've heard of it, Josh, sounds like, right?
Yeah.
So the Doomsday Seed Vault, where they're trying to store seeds as fast as they can, The deep underground military bunkers exist. We have photographs of the entrances. We know that they're stocking them up. We spoke to some of the major freeze-dried food producers who were offline with retail for a very long time because they were stocking up military bunkers. Again, for those who think that our current paradigm could have continued much longer, you're simply not looking at reality. We have the planet that historically nature supplied 75% of global GDP for free. You could go in the ocean and catch a fish that grew by itself. Now they're having to farm that, of course, with great energy and great effort. And again, 95% collapse in global pelagic fish populations. But there are things that just simply can't be hidden much longer. And the point in time they can't hide these things, and the public panics, realizing they've bought a complete lie that was never sustainable, and their life is about to go upside down. At that point, you'll have panic. And I would argue the power structure is preparing for that right now.
You know, I don't even know if this relates, but over the past few years, there have been a number of stories about all the scientists that are ending up dead. And I'm thinking, well, if I wanted to hide a secret, especially one that was based on scientific data, I would start offing scientists. And this might sound way conspiratorial, but is there a connection here?
Of course there's a connection, and I appreciate you bringing that up. And for those that think that this issue is not on that scale, again, those who don't think so are not living in reality. We've seen a number of NASA scientists die recently, quite spectacularly.
Yep.
And such spectacular deaths tend to get the attention of everybody else who's now really afraid to speak out. And I've spoken to some of these people, so I'm not speculating. Most recently, we had a NASA scientist die in a very anomalous plane crash in Southern California, and he was the type that might have spoken out. We know they know what's going on. They can't not know. Again, the scope and scale of these programs is absolutely immense. And I deal with people from major universities that are funded by the power structure, by companies like Monsanto and so forth. I deal with scientists from Duke, Stanford, Harvard who are afraid to speak out. They're petrified. And for good reason, And we know everybody's being monitored now, don't we? We all know that. So you can't really say much or communicate much without the power structure knowing about it. And that's the kind of fear that's been instilled in everybody. And Josh, ask yourself why, for example, if they weren't preparing to be able to control the population, why would everybody's doorstep be GPSed in the 2010 census? They hiked 3/4 of a mile into my wilderness location twice to GPS my doorstep. Why would they do that? And the Census Bureau gave no credible answer for that. I know because I called them, I tried. No credible answer. They simply want to have a GPS location for everybody, whether it's for drones or to terrorize the population as they do overseas with a few people can terrorize a whole population with drones and so forth. From many directions, the power structure is preparing to try to deal with a population that is going into panic mode.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, a lot of people have forgotten about that completely because our attention span is so short. But they were GPSing everybody through the census, and that got a lot of people irate for about a week and a half. And then we were on to some sort of Kim Kardashian story, which kind of leads to the... Sadly, it's true. You know, it leads to this idea that we have become so dumbed down and so distracted by every little thing that they're pulling off these massive takeovers, whether it's the economic takeover or the food takeover through GMO crops. Is it? Well, I don't even want to say that. So let's back up a little bit. Let's say you've listened to this show, you've heard it, you are now on board, you went to the website, geoengineeringwatch.org. Is there anything we can do for ourselves personally? Like, are there magnets we should be putting on top of our home to attract, well, aluminum is not magnetic. Are there, cleanses we could be doing? You know, what can we do as individuals to at least give ourselves a fighting chance here?
There are things we can do. In fact, on that note, the power structure, by the way, has chelation. Chelation referring to purging these metals out of your system. They have chelation methods that are not available to you and I. I've spoken to a Norwegian researcher that has been through a facility in Germany. You're on a table for a day and a half. Your blood's pulled from your body. This is very exclusive methods. So they have their own methods. But we can chelate also. I would recommend your listeners go to their local nutritional center and try to get on a good chelation protocol so that you can keep these metals moving through your systems instead of lodging there. Back to the many layers of the spraying. Josh, a society that is sick, unhealthy, and not firing on all neurons is much easier to control. So there are, again, many layers to the climate engineering issue, and we are all getting dumber by the day. There's no question about that. We know the materials in the air. We know the cognitive effect. We know the health effect. It's affecting all of us, period. So this makes a population, again, easier to control. But you can keep these metals moving through your system. You can help the situation. But at the same time, we must respond to what's happening in the sky, because if we can't stop this source, then all our methods will at some point be moot. So I would recommend chelation therapy to your listeners, while at the same time I hope they join us in this battle. And I don't ask anybody to believe me. Please don't believe a word I say. Please just look at the data we have on the site. Look at the information we have. Look at the testimony we have from Union of Concerned Scientists, Fish and Game biologists, Forest Service biologists. We have experts giving us testimony on this issue. You simply have to go and look at the data.
Well, we only have one segment left in this show, and Dane, I want to keep you around for it. And folks, I want you to stay where you're at too. We'll be back right after this. No, seriously, just Google dead scientists. It's just absolutely crazy how many of them are, and what's interesting is the fields that they're in are kind of related. If you've been listening to this interview, so Dane, the website geoengineeringwatch.org. What's the end game here? I mean, so the military people who are involved might not realize that they're doing something terrible. They've been convinced they're doing something great. You might even have politicians that think they're doing something great. Who's really behind it, and what's the end game?
All roads lead to those who print the money. We've had our forefathers, of course, tell us that central banks would be more dangerous than standing armies. When a government can't produce its own money and you have private bankers producing it, they control the planet. They control the military. I believe in their delusion, and we are talking about psychotic individuals at the top. That's a statistical fact, and we know, Josh, from psychoanalysis of psychopathic people, they have a common blind spot, and that spot is this: a near total lack of comprehension as to the consequences of their actions, even to themselves. When they detonated the first nuclear bombs, they really didn't know what would happen, but they did it anyway. Project Starfish, the detonation of nuclear weapons in the magnetosphere, no idea what that would do. In fact, we're probably still seeing damage from those experiments. They do it anyway. So I think that if we look at the effort they put into the climate engineering, the effort to hide it, to make it look normal, usual to people, to get society to accept it, I think they felt that they could do this indefinitely without consequence. And that's a very delusional notion. And now I think we're seeing a fracturing of the power structure, a panic in the power structure. Now they're realizing that they have torpedoed their own ship, if you will, and now they're simply trying to hide it as long as possible while they dig in. I spoke to one of the architects of these programs one time. That conversation came through a congressional rep who referred him to me. I had one conversation with this individual. I recognize his name from patents. I know he is who he said he was. He stated this to me, that the power structure will try to hide these programs as long as possible because they know, and now I'm quoting him directly, that if the population ever finds out, they will seek out those responsible and hang them or shoot them in front of a firing squad. Those in power know the population will never stand for this. If this truly gets out and everyone on the planet realizes they've been a part of this grand and lethal experiment, their health has been irreparably damaged, their children's health irreparably damaged, and the planet on which their children's future depends has been now damaged beyond any recovery to what we've known. What do you think populations are going to do?
Yeah, and you have this situation where, is it too late? I mean, even with the power structure trying to protect themselves, is it even possible? The damage that's going to be done, you'd have to outlast whatever catastrophe ensues. Do you find that this might be the end of humanity?
Mathematically speaking, on the current trajectory, there is no question that we face quite near-term extinction. And the current statistics show this, and I know a lot of people are going to not believe this is possible, but this is a mathematical fact. Right now, it graphs out somewhere to no life left on the planet by about the late 2030s. The Northern Hemisphere ahead of that. And that doesn't mean we exist fine until then. We're on the threshold of a complete overturning of what we have known right now. Now, here's the big variable, Josh, is that the greatest leap we could take in the right direction is to expose and stop climate engineering for a number of reasons. One, it would make clear to the populations around the globe that not only are they expendable to the power structure, they're a liability. It would overturn that paradigm. And two, it would allow the planet to respond to the damage already done, because the planet can't respond. Normally, with the increased carbon, the planet would rain more. The hydrological cycle would be greatly enhanced. That can't happen with an atmosphere full of aerosols, toxic aerosols. So in regard to the planet going back to the one we've known, not going to happen in any time frame that matters. We know this from past paleo events, the PETM event, the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum 55 million years ago, methane mass expulsion, exactly like what's happening now, except what's happening now looks to be much worse. We had an equilibrium period of 10 to 20 million years afterward. That's a long time. And during that time, we had a dead zone in the center of the country from about 30 degrees south to 30 degrees north where nothing lived. Now, we're heading toward a very different planet at best. If we don't stop climate engineering, we have no chance. And industrialized civilization in its current form, I know this is not a popular thing to say with listeners. People want to think that this sort of reality we've lived in can go on forever. It can't, and it's in its death throes right now. But if we could stop climate engineering and create a complete change of direction for the human race and allow the planet to respond to the damage done, perhaps we have some chance then, and that's our best shot. And that's simply something that we have to engage in. If we love our children, if we regard them at all, we have to engage in this fight. And if we could accomplish this one thing, to expose climate engineering, it would be a quantum leap, Josh, in the right direction.
Is part of the problem, though, that people have been crying wolf for too long? Because we have the environmentalists who warned us against global warming. A lot of them have been discovered as frauds. And in addition to that, though, they said, in the 60s we were going to end. Well, we're never going to make it past the 80s. And then there was the next thing is going to be global cooling by 1989. That never happened. The world is going to be over by 2007. Obviously, that didn't happen. Have there been too many cried wolf calls put out there? Yes.
And I can't bear responsibility for any of that. I was not the one who cried wolf. And I would, again, the difference with this issue is very soon, and the reason I'm willing to speak so candidly, very soon, those who use that as a premise to ignore this issue will not have a choice. They will have to face what's unfolding around them very, very soon. And that's why I'm willing to speak so candidly. We're not talking about things that are off decades away. It's here. It's now. So the issues, for example, the global cooling thing that was brought up in the 70s, Josh, that was related to climate engineering as well, because we had a linear heating of the planet from the start of the Industrial Revolution in the 1850s to the late 1940s, at which time geoengineering was really ramped up and had a very profound initial effect, so that the rise in temperature leveled off for a time until by the 70s the climate scientists couldn't figure out what was going on because they didn't know climate engineering was going on. So you heard some talk about why the planet's cooling and so forth. But it was related to climate engineering again. The negative aspects kicked in, the warming kicked in again. So we have a lot of things that have not been acknowledged and realized by the population. In regard to the environmentalists, hardest people to reach of all, hardest of all to reach. They simply don't want to face this issue. They want to save a fish or a frog while the whole house burns to the ground. And I've been the most perplexed at their hypocrisy. Al Gore, total hypocrite. How do you make a movie like he made and have stock in the very companies he claims to be fighting? So we've had a lot of people that have muddied the water, but this is not about Al Gore. It's not about carbon credits, both of which are shams. It's about reality. And I challenge people, investigate what I'm saying. Please, please, please don't believe me. Investigate. Look at our site. Look at the data. Look for yourself. Decide for yourself.
And yeah, if this is real, then this is cataclysmic. Give us where people should start. I mean, I've been on your website for 2 days now. It's very big. A lot of information. Where do they start?
Well, we try to post like the presentations that are in the center of the home page. That's a good spot to view those presentations, look at the data there because images are presented for the statements made. And that's a good place to start digging in. There's a film called Look Up, narrated by William Baldwin. I'm sure you know who he is. If people go to skyderalert.com, SKYDER alert.com, you can find a trailer to that film. I'm not directly involved with that, but it's a good starter film. But again, the data on the presentations on the homepage of Geoengineering Watch is a good place to start. And then, of course, we have archives. We have thousands of articles, literally. But the center page, we try to keep the most basic items there for people to dive in. And again, you don't need to know. You don't need to be a scholar in this regard. You simply need to know that there's experiments going on with very lethal fallout, decimating the biosphere, toxifying every breath we take, and we're not being told. And so if people learn a few basics, you can communicate this issue to others, have something to pass on to them so they have credible data, and you can start spot fires of awareness that way. You don't need to be a scholar to help. And every one of your listeners, Josh, any one of your listeners, could be the final grain of sand that tilts the scale toward critical mass. So we all have power in this equation. We have to use that power now.
Well, Dane, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for being bold in just proclaiming the research that you found on this issue. I know for a fact that whenever you talk about something like this, the skeptics come out of the woodwork, and you've been standing strong for a long time now. So thank you so much for that. Dane Wigington, the website geoengineeringwatch.org. That does it for today, my friends. Remember, look into jury nullification. No victim, no crime. Today, tomorrow, and as always, may your path lead to heaven, and may freedom follow in your footsteps.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you loved what I had to say, then subscribe right here. If you hated what I had to say, subscribe right here. It's fun being mad on social media, isn't it? Either way, I'd love to hear from you. Send me an email right there.